So I'm going to pray, Phill, if that's okay, and then I'm going to introduce you and hand over to you.
That'd be great.
So, Heavenly Father, we thank you that you love to lead us, you love to guide us. You are such a good shepherd to us. What a leader you are. Lord, you are the great shepherd, and we are often as under shepherds of yours, as it talks about in the New Testament. And we pray you will show us how we should lead. Lord, thank you that being inspected is not something that we should live in fear of. But thank you, Lord, that all things can work for good for those that love you. And Lord, with these processes of inspection that occur, Lord, help us to have your attitude and your perspective, your right perspective on how we lead and how we process issues related to inspection. Lord, would you guide Phill now? Thank you for the wealth of experience and the wealth of experience of being in relationship with you, more than just the wealth of experience of having had adventures with inspection. Father, bless him, I pray, as he shares. Guide us to ask the questions that are the ones that are going to be good for us to ask and process together. In Jesus' name, I pray. Amen. Phill is my friend. Phill has been somebody in this ever since I joined the Christian Schools Trust. Phill has been around and has been somebody that he's a very easy guy to talk to, easy guy to ask questions of. His humble leadership manner is an example to us. And Phill, it's a privilege to introduce you and to have you take us through this session. Bless you, Phill.
Well, thanks very much, Stephen. Yes, it's lovely to be hosted by a friend, and we do go back quite a while. Okay, so we're going to have to be selective. This is a big area, and we can aid the kind of selection process. If you'll put your questions into the chat bar, then Steve can monitor them and we'll tag team, and he'll kind of filter and see the kind of questions that are being asked, and then he can lead the questioning. I'm showing my screen so I can't see the questions. So it's leadership and inspection, and it's how to prepare spiritually and practically. So I'm going to look at spiritually first, and then I'm going to stop, give you some resources, and we'll go for some questions on spiritual preparation, because at the end of this process, or at the center of this process, is a head teacher or a school leader or an SLT, a team of people who have to front the hosting of the Ofsted inspection team in front of the eyes of their community, all the staff, all the children, all the parents, everybody involved. And if you are spiritually prepared, you are much more likely to do better. But of course, it's a very practical process as well. So we do need to be selective and look at some of the practical areas. And again, I'll kind of map out where I'm going to go. And if you think, it's not really going to cover what I'd hoped he would, just start dropping those questions in, and at an appropriate time, hopefully we can get to and discuss what you have on your heart. Okay, so, right. So this is my overview. I want to talk about why you should be really positive as you consider being inspected. Steve mentioned that already. And of course, inspection isn't just something that happens to you 2 years every 3 or 4. You've got to be aware of it and leading and preparing for it. And then you've got to be leading during it. And very importantly, in the period after Ofsted go, a lot of schools, a lot of head teachers, a lot of leadership teams just kind of sag, become very flat after the inspection process is over, especially if it's been grueling and your judgment has not been as you hoped. And then we're going to look at some of the current inspection framework, emphasis on curriculum, quality of learning. There's 4 areas and we'll get to them, but I'm going to be selective, and I'm going to be looking at curriculum cohesion and deep dives as my focus. And then of course, we're going to leave some time for questions. So being positive, here's a question. And if you could start perhaps putting your answers in the chat bar, I'm going to ask Steve if he'll take 2 or 3 interesting ones, and give you a little bit of airspace to share with us how you feel about being inspected. So what is your attitude to inspection? You may be ahead, you may not be ahead, but what goes through your head and your heart when someone tells you, we've just had a phone call, Ofsted will be here tomorrow? What is your gut reaction? I wonder what you'd begin to share. So if you could start sharing that, that would be really good. I'm just going to kind of set out on a course, but then I'm going to stop and let you have some say if you've got something interesting to say. Here's a scripture from Timothy. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who does not need to be ashamed and who correctly handles the word of truth. Now, you might think I'm masochistic, but I think inspection is something that we should relish, rise to, and excel in, even though there is so much at stake and so much could potentially be exposed about our schools and about ourselves as leaders, if we're honest. But it gives us the opportunity to explain to the authorities designated by government the contribution our schools make and the wider debate on what education could be that we can contribute to. Now, I'm not sure where that masochistic, okay, bring on the inspection came from. I think it might be to do with having a father in the RAF. I grew up and I was inspected quite a lot. I've met the Queen 3 times, and once I was inspected by her as a 10-year-old, a cub, when she landed by helicopter at the RAF base I lived at. And I actually think that to be inspected is to be pronounced ready and equipped and able to go. And I have this feeling that where people have got authority invested in them, like Ofsted, like the Queen, they take it seriously. And therefore, their inspection is to help. Now, I know there are horror stories. I know there are individual inspectors who might bear grudges against Christian schools, possibly. But my overall attitude is to be really positive, because anything else will actually expose me to failure. And I've been head for about 27 years, and in that time, we had 4 or 5 successful Ofsted inspections, but in 2016, we were caught out with an inadequate judgment. How did that happen? And how did we recover it to be a good school again within 2 short years? And how did I lead through that 24 months? And what did I learn about myself? Well, I could see within the first 10 minutes of the inspection that we were going to fail. And as you might guess, our safeguarding was not robust enough. Now, we took it seriously with the time that we were able to allocate with my deputy at the time. He took responsibility for it, but within 3 questions, within less than 5 minutes, we realized they were not going to pass us. So we had to go through the next 2 days hiding it from staff largely, but working through something that we knew we were going to be failed in. And we know why. We knew why we were inadequate. We basically hadn't given the time to go as thorough as we could have done or should have done. And it wasn't through neglect, it wasn't through, possibly through inexperience, but we realized we didn't have the resources to put at it. It's really interesting. 60 CST schools, there were about 10 years ago, that's been reduced to about 30, half the number of schools that we had about 10 years ago. And a lot of the smaller schools who didn't have the resources to handle things like Ofsted have, for one reason or another, folded and closed.
Phill, if I could just pause you there, I'm just going to ask Joseph. Joseph, it's lovely to have you with us, but Joseph, could you mute, please? I'm unable to mute you, and some sounds are coming through. Joseph Ikabe, thank you. Sorry, Phill, do carry on.
Yeah, thank you. However, I was thoroughly prepared and spiritually ready, even for a huge setback like being called an inadequate school. And I was able to lead through our community, once inspection was over. But let me tell you why I still relish inspection. So you can see a little print there of the Queen of Sheba visiting the court of King Solomon. And if you know the story in 1 Kings, the Queen of Sheba visits his court because she's heard of his wisdom and his administration. So she goes to inspect him. The story tells us that she heard of his fame and his relationship with the Lord. And she came to test him with hard questions. And she talked to him about all that was on her mind. And the story says that Solomon answered her. Nothing that she asked him was too difficult for her. And at the end, she was overwhelmed. And one version says that she had no spirit left in her. She saw his wisdom. She saw what he'd built. She saw what he was able to provide for his people. She saw his administration. She saw his organization, and she saw the way his people worshipped. And her conclusion was, happy are your people and happy are your officials who sit under your wisdom. And she praised the God of Solomon, even though she was not a believer in Jehovah, and she gave him lots and lots of money. Now that story has been really precious to me. And a year before this inspection, a friend was just sharing with us in a leadership meeting how he'd been in a meeting and somebody was sharing that of all the things that we're able to accomplish in our schools, is there anything that was left unaccomplished? And her thought was that most of us maybe have got things that we've cherished in our heart that we would see happen, and they haven't quite happened, but we begin to console ourselves, well, that didn't come about, but so much has happened, so much has been achieved. And for me, it was that government would actually come and look at our schools and say, what can we learn of you? And up to that point, it hadn't happened. And she encouraged this friend of mine, don't let go of that. Don't settle for not having that fulfilled. If it's been in your heart all these years and so much has been established, perhaps this will happen and you are on the verge of it, so don't give up. And very soon after that, we got a call from Bradford LEA, and they said, we would like to put a complex autistic child with you. And the SENCO said, well, yes, great, if you'll send the money. And the person said, well, can we talk about how that happened? So 5 years down the line, we have a DSP with 20 highly complex autistic children who are funded by Bradford Authority, and they come and they work with us and they pay us 70% of our capitation for these 20 children to be educated in our school. And at the Ofsted, after our failed one in 2016, in 2018, one of the lines in our report said, this is a happy school. It didn't quite say happy are your children, but God trumps any trauma that Ofsted brings. So I would be encouraging you really to be positive about the process of being inspected, because if you have been obedient to what God has called you to do as a school community, he wants others to see it, and not just your children, not just your parents, not just your locality, but the officials sent by the king, by the government, by the Queen of Sheba. So I would encourage you, if you don't have a positive attitude about inspection, begin to ask God to shape you and change you so that you are ready for this inevitable event. Okay, so coming out of that, some advice that's largely spiritual before we get on to the practical, but it's practical as well. Okay, so inspection readiness should always be central to your development. You can't afford to say, well, we were inspected last year, we can take it easy this year, maybe next year, and then we need to get ready again. You need to be developing your school all the time, and not just for Ofsted, you know, because you are a God-given ministry with unfulfilled plans and things that God wants to continue to develop in you. So you must always give your eye to be developing your readiness. Therefore, your school improvement plan is a very important document for you and your governors and your SLT. And that is a document that we run in our school. We update it 3 times a year. So each SIP, each school improvement plan version runs for 4 months. And what's on it are 4 or 5 overarching big ideas that we need to be developing in the school.
You just
And
pause
then,
again for me, Phil.
yeah.
I'm sorry, Lillian Akuma, could you just put yourself on mute for us, because there's quite a large amount of noise coming through. Thank you, Lillian. Bless you.
I think Lillian was stirring her cup of coffee there. So yeah, you should have just 4 or 5 big overarching kind of aims that you're working on for that particular school improvement plan, and then it needs to be worked down into all the departments. So, you know, if, for example, developing reading across your school is important, what's it going to look like in primary? What's it going to look like in middle? What's it going to look like in secondary? So you need to have that document that is always being updated. Your governors need to see it. When I was head teacher, that is the one document that the chair of governors used to hold me accountable to. And he said, this is what you say you're doing. Tell me how you're actually doing on your school improvement plan. All the SLT need to contribute to it. It's nothing. It's not just a document that the head teacher writes, and all the staff should be able to see it and read it. This is not a document for your shelf and for dust. And it should drive your inset days. It should drive your department meetings. It should drive your budgeting. It should drive the energy that you're putting into your school. Now, I'm not beginning to go down a road here to suggest that Ofsted drives your school, because in that process, you will actually be able to decide what you are also really about. It will help you to decide, this is what we've got to do for Ofsted, but this is where it jars. This is where it's not smooth. This is where it doesn't fit our Christian mission. And if you think of that story, when Jesus had to pay taxes, he had to render unto Caesar what was due to Caesar, and he had to render to God the things that were of God. But what Jesus actually did is he provided for both. He said to Peter, go and fish. Go about your practical everyday business and catch a fish, and in its mouth you will find a coin. So you have to, if you want to stay in the game of being a school, then you've got to play by them rules, and Ofsted set them. But that doesn't mean to say that sets what you are about totally. We are able, and feel very comfortable at being able to say, well, yeah, this is what Ofsted requires of us, but this is what we feel that God is asking of us also. And of course, the two have got to work together. Okay, slightly interrupted there. So be as informed as you can be. Okay, and I'm going to give you links to the 2 documents that you really need to go to that are from the government, the handbook and the Ofsted inspection framework. And so you need to be as informed as you can be. Read it for yourself, interpret it for yourself, but also look around you at people that can help you. The CST, in between these national conferences, we actually put on a conference for governors and school leaders, and we look at the issues of being ready for inspection. I'm going to recommend a resource called The Key, and I'm going to give you a link to their website, because they also are one of the many kind of websites or groups of people that will actually help you to be as ready as you can be. So you've got to be as informed as you can be. You've got to take care of your spiritual health, okay? Because you've got to be ready for that phone call. You can't be having a low week or a dull month or a kind of coasting half term. You can't afford to do that anyway, as a head teacher or as a school leader. And so Philip North this morning, Bishop Philip was telling us one of the key things we needed to do to be able to bring joy was to look after ourselves. And over the years, I have learned to take this really, really seriously. The dictionary says that healthiness includes ideas of wholeness, balance, and it is a freedom from debilitating weaknesses. And you are designed to be in post for a long time, probably decades, probably. We received our inadequate when I was in my late 50s, and by the time they came back 2 years down the line, you know, I was able to be well enough to have led the school through that period. And so fruitfulness is something that God has designed you to be for years and years and years. And it's the joy of being alive for Jesus, isn't it? Knowing that you shouldn't be burning out. It happens, but it doesn't need to if you take care of yourself. A little more of that later. You've also got to realize that you've got to build a team approach, because what they require of you is too big for any one or two people to do on their own. The whole of your leadership, including your governing body, have to be on this, and your teachers need to be owning this process as well as you go forwards. And so I'm going to begin to pull this section to an end. But if you want to play the game, them's the rules. And that all goes back to your attitude, I think, on inspection. So just to bring this to the end, I just thought I'd put our inspection report there, the positive one, because you should really read what God did to our school community over those 2 years and the things they said about us. For us, this was a Queen of Sheba report, okay? And we ended up getting lots of money in the end. And from that money we got from our local authority, we actually employed a business manager who was able to make sure our policies were really up to scratch. The key is a go-to website for professional and practical advice on running current. So you could read that there. Also, I also run the Essential Christian Teacher course, and the seminar for that's on tomorrow afternoon. But I've included one of the modules for you. It won't take you long to read, maybe 10, 15 minutes. But it is about how to look after your spiritual health as a school leader. And includes, among other things, being able to practice solitude. You were never meant to be lonely in your position as head. And God calls us out of solitude, out of loneliness, into solitude. And solitude is that ability to be intimate with God in your closet, so that when you come out of your closet, you are equipped and ready for all that the world will bring. But if you click there, you'll be able to read a lot more on spiritual health. It talks about you being accountable. It talks about you having key conversations and making key decisions, but we don't have a lot of time to go through that, so I'm going to move on. And working as a team, I'm not sure if you're aware of Strength Finder, but we did a whole Strength Finder inset day in our school. Everybody found out what their 5 core strengths were. And then we've been through a process this year of making sure everybody is in the right job, doing the right thing. And everybody is suited to what they are gifted, called, and equipped to be able to do. So that's just one resource that you could use to develop yourself as a team. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. And Steve, I'm going to ask if you'd like to filter some questions.
There's a few comments and things in response to your how do people feel when that kind of question comes in. The phones. Yeah. I've had the phone ring, and the inspectors phone me up to say, "Hello, Mr. Bigu, we're coming to inspect your school, and it is a brought forwards inspection," which is a kind of dreaded words to hear, because it means that there's some kind of complaint or something has happened, so there's some kind of issue. So I do understand where people have put the kind of terror and fear and the adrenaline starts running and all of those kinds of comments about inspection. And there is a huge amount of fear associated with it. Fear of also unjust criticism. I know I'm just looking in some things that happened with Reading School, for example, were just awful. All sorts of unfairness around all of that. So do you want to just say anything more about that kind of fear attitude? I know that's something you've had to face, Phill, at various points, the fears.
Yeah.
How did you come through that and be able to shift your attitude from it being based in fear?
Yes, precisely. I think it's natural. I think that adrenaline and that, oh my goodness, and yeah, we're kind of ready, but not totally ready. And they're going to be here either this afternoon or tomorrow. I think that's totally understandable. But I think if you are in leadership in a Christian school or any school, those kinds of times, and I mean, I remember the day I got a phone call where one of our students had taken her life. I remember the phone call when one of my colleagues said one of our staff members has been arrested, and those things are going to happen on your shift, aren't they? But if you have deep roots with your Father and you are prepared and you've explored all your weaknesses and the things that you know are likely to catch you out or have caught you out in the past, it's an ongoing commitment to letting God sanctify you, change you, heal you. And that's why time alone with God is essential, so that you're actually ready for the the trial. Cometh the hour, cometh the man, so the going saying goes.
Yeah, very good. And I mean, my comment was, have I got all my paperwork done? I know that was constantly, there seems to be so much paperwork stuff that you have to be on top of. And what you're saying about the school improvement plan and having that in place, that can lift some of that anxiety. If you know in your school improvement plan, you've got regular reviews and updates of all that kind of paperwork that you know you need to have in place. That can actually, that organizational structure can bring some level of peace, so that when the phone call does come in, you have a sense of, well, we've been working towards making sure on a regular basis that we're getting the right kind of paperwork updated and reviewed. Yeah. Is that what you found?
Yes, absolutely. We often use, when we face something big, one of us will use the question, how do you eat an elephant? And then somebody else will say, one bite at a time. Okay. And you've got to be working towards it constantly. I would really encourage you, if you can, try and afford to appoint a business manager, someone who is gifted in administration, who does not have their mind full of children or lesson plans or curriculum or timetable. But I think the days where we could have really tiny schools where the head did a lot of this stuff, I think those days have gone. And I think, we have lost a lot of schools. I think the ones that are still able to be strong and actually thrive have realized that they've got to diversify their provision. And, it took us about 20 years before up until that point, the only people we employed were teachers. But it took us a while to realize that we needed to diversify and appoint people with different skills, because this is just too big for the head or the deputy to be able to handle on their own or between them, in our estimation. I know you can't, it's not always easy, because you've got to pay for that person, but
well, that's right. And it's an investment, isn't it? And but it's also an investment in the head or in the staff of the school to make sure someone is able to think through those issues if possible. It doesn't always have to be full-time, can be part-time. There are creative ways of looking at that. And Phill, I know that in your school, the governors realized they needed to make sure you had space and time, and they gave that to you so that you could lead and think things through. And whether we're kind of teachers in senior management position or heads or directors or different ones here, I think we do need to regularly be asking the question, have our staff got enough time, not just to spin all the plates and do all the teaching and the education, which naturally is at the very front of our thinking, but what are those other roles that we need to fulfill in terms of inspection, in terms of those broader roles? And are we able to give time to people to do those tasks if they are actually some of our teachers, can we release them from some of their teaching commitment to be able to focus on that either for a short period of time or in an ongoing way, so that it's kind of weekly commitment to be able to focus on those kind of areas. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, Phill.
Yeah, I mean, we took some practical steps a few years ago. One of them was to basically block my non-contacts into chunks like afternoons and mornings, and then I was allowed to go to a friend's house who lived in the woods, and I could just go to a room that she had in the back of her house, and she used to host me. She used to bring me drinks and bits of cake, and she had a room that I could pray in, or just at times I fell asleep and woke up and went back into work. I shouldn't have been at a place where I fell asleep, but times where I could just work on things uninterrupted or work on hearing the Lord. So that was a really practical step. And my school got used to me not being in there every day. Now we've got a much bigger SLT team. It's not so necessary. The other thing is that I was teaching 2 subjects, English and history. And so we thought, well, let's appoint another teacher. But in the end, what we decided to do was appoint me a PA, and that cost less. So a PA for 3 days was better for us than actually buying another teacher. So just think of all the creative ways that you can support your head teacher, or you can ask for help. At one time in the early days, my wife actually wrote 2 letters of resignation for me, my teaching resignation or my head's, and she just slipped them to the chair of governors and said, which one would you like to take up? So yeah, sometimes you have to get people to fight your corner and take care of your leadership. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not about a kind of a selfish thing. It's actually it's a false economy not to invest in these areas in the long term. But we're in danger of carrying on in this vein for too long. So Phill, would you want to take us on to the next stage? And again, people, please fill the chat box if you've got any thoughts, any questions, any reflections that you want to put in there, and I can field those back to Phill. Thank you.
Okay, and Steve, do feel free if you think the moment is to be interrupted would be better. You can do that.
Sure, thanks, Phill.
Okay, so obviously inspection. The inspection framework was published in May of 2019, and then it was updated in September 2019. So the current framework is under the new Ofsted kind of leader is brand new. It's hardly been used, and COVID kind of came in just after the new inspection framework came in. So there's 4 areas: quality of education, behavior and attitudes, personal development and leadership and management. And today I'm looking at the clock, I've got 25 minutes left. I'm only going to focus on a couple of aspects of quality of education. And if you want to discuss more, you need to get your questions in quick. Okay, so the curriculum. So there's not so much emphasis on data, though data of course is still important, but it's your curriculum. And the 3 important words are intention, implementation, and impact. The framework for setting out the aims of programs of education, including the knowledge and skills to be gained at each stage. So what do you intend to do as a school? You do not have to use the national curriculum, but if you say you do, that's how you'll be judged. So if you now have freedom to develop a Christian school under this framework, I'm really encouraged that in this day and age, when liberties could be seen to be closing down, we have a framework that allows us to develop a Christian approach. What's your intention? You've got to be really, really clear about it. And then the translation of that framework over time into a structure is the implementation. So these 3 keywords are so important. And then reflecting on the impact of what difference your curriculum has made to your learners. So these 3 phases are worth thinking about really, really carefully and accounted for. But they bring a really nice framework. And I just kind of picked up on Dawn talking about heart concepts. I wasn't in Dawn's seminar, but if she's using the heart concept, which talks about source, means, and fulfillment, source, what are you intending, means the implementation, and the fulfillment is the impact, isn't it, if you think about it? And I found that really neat, that that's how the government were thinking. So progress should not be defined by hitting the next data point, rather, and I've lost a bit of my screen here, students attain with a well-sequenced, well-constructed curriculum that they're able to make progress in. Okay, so the key documents are the education inspection framework. And if you click on to that, I think Therese will upload this for you to be able to get this PowerPoint. So if you kind of run through the inspection, run through the PowerPoint, you'll be able to click on there and see the current inspection framework. That's 14 pages long. And then you've got the inspection handbook, which is how the inspectors will work when they come to your school. And that's about 96 pages. It's obviously a much more thorough read. And then realize that as part of the inspection handbook, there are 4 smaller documents as part of the inspection handbook that you'll need to be aware of, especially if you have an early years setting. That's got its own framework. And because we're independent schools, non-association independent handbook is what you'll need to read. But listen, Ofsted recognizes that providers take different approaches to the curriculum. Different approaches to the curriculum will be judged fairly. We recognize and support the importance of providers' freedom to choose their own curriculum approaches within the appropriate legal parameters. Now, isn't that great? Isn't that still liberty? Isn't that still freedom to shape our Christian schools? So you have the chance to frame and describe what your school should be about, okay? And that's how you'll be judged. Of course, as independent schools, we are also under the independent schools framework, the independent school standards. So we basically get 2 inspections when people come to us. But I was really encouraged that curriculum and not data is going to be at the forefront of the latest version of school inspections. Now, this is a challenge, but I think this is a much fairer level of playing field for us to be able to
yes,
account for education that works.
If I just chip in there, obviously many of our schools are under ISI, the Independent Schools Inspectorate now, and there are, if you're a part of the Independent Schools Association as well, there's some fantastic support through, not just through the documents, but they will come and do a dummy inspection for you and give you some support through that. And so a question that's kind of coming from Will there, if you've become a part of the ISA, there is a load of support in that kind of area for you as you're moving to ISI from Ofsted. And the key document there is what's called the commentary on the regulations, the handbook on the commentary for the regulations, something like that. It's a massive tome that basically explains in detail how you can make sure that you do achieve all of the regulations that are there, and someone will even come and give you advice about that. So there is support out there, and there's support for schools that have Ofsted inspecting them. We've got people and schools that have managed to travel that journey, and also with the Independent Schools Inspectorate. Again, if you're in the ISA, there's some great support through the ISA as well as through some of those other schools and heads. And one of the delight of being a part of a Christian Schools Trust is that the head teachers work together, they support each other in all these kinds of areas. And some of the training that we can do, we can also send people in to have a little look at what's going on in your school and maybe hit some of those issues that would be quite obvious to an inspector should they come in. Phil, you've even done that, I think, at times, haven't you?
Yeah, obviously we take money from Bradford LEA, so we feel that they're more comfortable working directly through Ofsted with us. But we've looked at the possibility of joining ISI. And everything, I think every school in the CST with heads who are friends that have joined have had a really positive experience. So yeah, but I mean, we sometimes you just get to know of like we had a recently not retired inspector, but an inspector that had cut his inspections down, and he became a friend of the school, and we just invited him in. Anybody who knows what they're talking about, invite them in.
Yes.
And as I said, you know, imagine me as a little 10-year-old cub and Her Majesty standing in front of me. Inspect me, Your Highness. Have that attitude, and use whoever comes across your path.
And for those that working in other nations as well who are with us, you know, I'm certain that God will provide friends. And we want to say, you said about solitude, we need to be kind of learn to be alone with the Lord, but he also puts us alongside people that it's when it's the right time to be supported by others and others who've walked that same kind of path. And there always seems to be somebody, does there not, Phill?
Yes, and that's because I think God knows we need somebody at the right time. I mean, I have had divine people or appointments where people have come across my path and have offered to help, either safeguarding or anything. And don't be too proud. Don't think, oh, this is just going to cause me a lot of stress. This is going to cause me, this is going to show up a lot of problems. Just realize that you're not going to be able to do it on your own, and any help you can get, any objective help you can get, because sometimes it's funny. I mean, we appointed a new member of staff to our SLT, and his first critical question was, why is there a number 3 on room 2? And we'd walked past it for years and years and years, and we called it room 2. There's a number 3 on the door. I mean, that's trivial, but it's the kind of thing that somebody else will spot instantly.
Right.
Yeah.
It's good.
Shall I move on?
Yeah, thank you, Phill.
Yeah. So what we did is we started writing a curriculum map, and we realized that we needed to establish curriculum cohesion, which is what Ofsted are looking for. That's one of their buzzwords, a curriculum map and curriculum cohesion, so that there is continuity within subjects as you work your way through the school. And we've got 3 phases. We've got EYFS, and we've got primary, then we've got middle for 4 years, then we've got upper school. And to eliminate wasted learning opportunities between phases, we have begun to work out our curriculum cohesion and our curriculum map, and also to begin to look for links between subjects. So where can we, where is our faith integrated subjects really strong? Where are we putting subjects together? Where does our sex and relationship education fit in? So at the end, I'd be prepared to share some of the stuff with it that we've developed if you think it might be of help. But we had to work out what we meant by curriculum cohesion: an effective and efficient plan to account for the links, connections, progress and experiences pupils will encounter as they develop through our Christian school. And it helps us to demonstrate a broad, balanced curriculum that's also Christian. We can account for the progression of skills, accommodate children out of their year group if needed. We can ensure continuity at transition points, identify transferable skills across the curriculum. And these were all things that we were criticized for not doing in our 2016 report. So we come back to this at least one inset day every year now for the last 3 years to make sure that we are developing this over time. Okay, and you can't do it quickly. In fact, you've got to bite this elephant, as it were, one bite at a time. Okay, now the good news is about, yes, your school will be judged on its curriculum. The serious note is that you've got to prepare for deep dives. And I just couldn't resist the picture of the guy in his deep diving suit. But deep dives are complex and detailed questions that can be asked of any member of staff about any subject. So traditionally, they would tend to ask these questions of the head or the SLT, but now they'll get out into the school and they might ask deep dive questions in art or deep dive questions in PE, subjects that possibly have not, traditionally been under the scrutiny. So in a sense, yeah, there's good news about the new Ofsted regime. And then there's challenges. I won't call it bad news, but there are challenges that all of us have got to know what we're doing. And if you are a school leader, you've got to, the people that you lead have got to know what they're doing and be able to give an account for it. Now, okay, you might get some opportunity to hedge off Ofsted descending on your new PE teacher who's only been working for a term, or your maternity, your English teacher who's only returned from a year's maternity leave. But they could go anywhere and ask anything. And what I've given you is a couple of sets of questions in a couple of key subjects to see the kind of things that they might ask. So this is from the website of Third Space. And these are some of the deep dive questions that you could be asked about maths. Now, just scan your eye upon them. How do class teachers know what went before in previous years? What is your pedagogy? How do you teach maths? What's the approach that you take throughout the school? What schemes, if any, do you follow? How is your curriculum coverage progressive throughout the school? How do you build year upon year in maths? What are the strengths and areas of development in your subject? Now, at this point, I need to give a really important caveat. Whatever resource you buy and whatever questions people come up with, realize that they are just an example of questions. So don't get the answers to these questions and think, I've got all the answers to questions. What you need to do is go back to the framework questions, the framework, and ask the questions for yourself. If we were Ofsted inspectors inspecting ourselves, what would we be asking of ourselves? But these are the kind of questions. So they're overall strategic questions, but they can also be very pertinent. How do you make sure that children who get stuck feel supported in lessons by their teachers? What's happening across the school? Okay. How do you feed back your assessments into your teaching and learning? How do you fill gaps in maths? How do you decide on math interventions? And these are just a handful of the kind of questions. But the more you begin to look at these questions, the more you begin to get a feel of the kind of questions you should be asking for yourselves about your provision in all your subjects. Okay, I'm going to show you some reading questions. I mean, we've just I've been charged with auditing and developing our reading development, because if you read the framework and the handbook, you'll see that reading is a focus that they'll be developing, reading across the curriculum. So, you know, let's imagine, Dawn, what kind of teacher are you? You're on my screen. What subject?
Primary.
Primary. Okay. So let's imagine that Ofsted come into your classroom and start asking you questions about some history work you're doing. So you've made reading books, reading material available to your students for their history topic. How does reading link to your area of the curriculum? So, you know, your development of reading, how am I seeing it happen through topic, through this history project that you're currently doing? What have you chosen for your children? How does it supplement what else you do? How are you going to increase reading fluency? How do you cater for those children who lack it? And if you are in the English kind of world like I am, the latest guru is a guy called Alex Quigley, and he's written 2 books, The Reading Gap and The Vocabulary Gap. If you get the reading gap, that's one of his questions about fluency. But any subject, children should be reading from texts in science. They should be reading from texts in art. It's not just the English teacher's job. Okay, so how can your science teacher read and improve reading fluency of chemical compounds in a chemistry chapter in your book? How do you select books for your children to read? How do you make sure that all staff have knowledge? How are all teachers being equipped to be teachers of readers? And is that something they would readily take on? How do leaders and staff use information about children's progress to improve their education, to plan their interventions? What staff training do you need? So can you see the level of questions? I mean, you might think, oh, it may be being in a room and having somebody nail the head teacher on data is a much more kind of attractive inspection. But no, if it's curriculum, then they're going to come out to your school and ask you all these questions. Now, they'll look at your paperwork, and if your SLT have got that in place, hopefully, you know, our reading development paper trail and our curriculum cohesion map trail shows that we're on a journey of really thinking carefully about our curriculum. So they come into our classrooms not to catch us out or to check where a weakness possibly is, but to see something working really well. Okay, so this is what it takes to be, you know, in the game, as it were, a phrase I've used as we've worked our way through. So those are just a couple of maybe examples of the kind of things that we think that they're looking for. So I couldn't actually get these two documents available on this PowerPoint through my lack of expertise. I've been at home this week and haven't really been able to do it. But there are some spaces here where you can go and get more on deep dives, find out what is out there on the market that will help you to not just get a set of questions you can apply for yourself, but learn to devise questions of your own so that you can anticipate 101 things that you might be asked as you get ready. Okay, and I think I need to leave it there and see if we can take some questions.